What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I help you guys keep on top of the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. If you're a regular subscriber, you've probably noticed that I'm not filming this where I normally film this. In fact, I'm currently not in China, nowhere near the studio. I am in the closet of my beach house in New Zealand. In fact, I'm so far off the grid, I actually have to go to the local cafe down the road just to get internet and follow all this crazy stuff that's been happening every morning. You may know that it is Chinese Spring Festival holiday in China, and so I came to New Zealand to surf and to swim for 2 weeks, take 2 weeks off, not put up an episode for a couple of weeks. I thought it's Chinese New Year. There's going to be no major stories coming out of China while I'm away. Well, unless you've been living under a rock for the last month, you know that is not the case. Some of the most important stories from China have been coming out over the last few weeks with the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus. I thought I really need to put an update up for you guys. I know I've had subscribers that have private messaged me and have been asking me for my thoughts on what's going on. I also believe that the Western media has done a piss poor job at delivering the facts for you guys and presenting the salient points that you need to know. So I'm going to do a quick update here and discuss what I think are the most important things that you need to know about this, and more importantly, what the political and economic ramifications for the current outbreak in China are. Because even though there is a serious health crisis within China, there is an even more important political crisis and economic crisis that you need to understand if you're interested in or follow China. If you're new to this show, I normally don't film this in this sort of environment. Please forgive me, forgive the audio and any visual issues. Once I get back to China next week, we go back to normal. But subscribers know this is about the content more than the audio quality. So I work an executive role in China, and my job is to follow macro developments coming out of China. I started this channel for my mates back home who are interested in China because I wanted them to be kept abreast of things. If you're interested in following this crazy, interesting country, China, maybe consider subscribing. And if you like this episode, smash that like button so more people can watch this content. Now, this is going to be different to a regular update. I'm just going to give my thoughts on the health situation, the political situation, the economic situation in the face of the novel coronavirus in China over the last few weeks. So the first question is, how dangerous is this thing? If you are in China, you need to be concerned. If you're outside of China, look, you're probably very safe. Though there have been many cases, the fatality rate of this particular virus, this coronavirus, is only about 2%. Compare that with SARS, which was 10%, or something like an extreme version of bird flu, which gets around 50%. This is a very low fatality. And we can see from the amount of people that have died, it is a tiny percentage of those who have actually caught the virus or have been hospitalized because of the virus. Most of the people who have died were elderly people from Wuhan, and the only death as of the recording of this outside of mainland China in the Philippines was an elderly man from Wuhan, the city where this virus originated from. In terms of the spread, yes, you're seeing far greater numbers catching this virus than you saw with something like SARS, so that can be concerning. But again, most of this is localized in Hubei and particularly Wuhan. One of the risks, however, with coronavirus is they're more susceptible to some other viruses for mutations. So there is still a risk that there could be a future mutation which either makes it more easy to contract or more fatal, bringing up the fatality percentage somewhat. But as of the filming of this, that's not the case. Now, there are some pretty scary numbers out there. As of the filming of this, there are about 20,000 people who have been affected and over 400 fatalities. But like I said, those fatalities are similar to what you'd see with any flu. The fatalities are basically people who are elderly that already had pre-existing medical conditions. One of the reasons why we're seeing the sort of spread and the speed of the spread is because of the long incubation period and the fact that the virus can be spread human to human before symptoms are shown. There are some reports that the incubation period is as long as 2 weeks. It was initially believed to be 1 to 4 days. So the fact that it's such a long incubation period and that it can be spread before symptoms are displayed increases the risk of more human to human transfers. There is also, of course, the well-reported issue of the slow response for the local government and the fact that it seems like there was an attempt to cover up the situation on the ground until much later. So, for example, we know that in early December, some of the first patients with this virus were hospitalized. By about mid-December, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that the government was well aware of this new form of pneumonia, this strange form of pneumonia, and that there may be human-to-human transmissions. In fact, a doctor, Mr. Li, from Hubei Xinhua Hospital in Wuhan on the 30th had expressed concerns to friends that there was a SARS-like virus that may be spreading human-to-human. The day after that, on the 31st of December, the local Wuhan government released a report acknowledging that there was this new form of pneumonia, but there was no examples of human-to-human transfers or transmissions at that point, even though it suggests there is evidence to suggest that they were well aware of it by that point. If you watch my episode, you'll know that on the 5th of January, I had already said that there were reports of this disease, or this virus rather, coming out of Wuhan, and that there was a possibility that it could mutate to human. By the 19th, I had said that it was highly likely that human-to-human transfers of the virus were occurring within Hubei province, and it was the next day, on the 20th, that the central government finally acknowledged that the coronavirus was being spread human-to-human, that people should avoid Wuhan. A few days after that, the city and some of the surrounding city in that cluster were put on lockdown, and since then, numbers have increased exponentially. As of the filming of this, with 20,000 cases reported, the situation is still not under control. Now, in terms of the place and the time of this virus outbreak, the timing and the location could not be worse. First, let's look at the location. Wuhan is the provincial capital of the province of Hubei, literally north of the lake. It is right in the middle of the country, and Wuhan acts as a logistics and transportation hub. It is a major logistics hub. In fact, it acts as a cross hub connecting south and north and east and west. It is bang on the Yangtze River. It connects the the Xinan, what is that, west, I translated it in my head, southwest corridor, the Sichuan and Chongqing basin, through the Yangtze River, through major cities like Wuhan, Nanjing, all the way through to the Yangtze River Delta, where you have the Zhejiang and Jiangsu provinces. That is a second major economic hub, where you have cities like Shanghai, Ningbo, Suzhou, Hangzhou, Nanjing. These are major financial centers, and of course, Shanghai is a beast of a trading hub. Not just the Yangtze River connection, you also have a major south logistics connection, connecting the Chinese Bay Area, where you have cities like Canton, Shenzhen, Macau, and Hong Kong, with the northern cluster of cities around Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei, the province of Hebei. So this is a major logistics hub, and you're seeing transportation of goods and people on this crossroads. The timing could also not be worse. China has two major holiday periods. You have the national holiday at the end of the year, and then you have Chinese New Year festival at the beginning of the year. These are both golden weeks where everyone in the country gets time off. Now, the national holiday week is typically a time where Chinese will go to major tourist locations, or even stay in their own city. Also, because they're clustering around, travelers are going to tourist locations, they're clustering around certain parts of the country. Maybe they go to Shanghai or Hong Kong for shopping, or South Korea. Maybe they go to Beijing for political tourism. Maybe they go to Xi'an for a cultural trip. Now, the difference between that and the Golden Week during Chinese New Year is that during Chinese New Year, more people move and they don't cluster around certain areas. A lot of people go back to their hometowns. A lot of these hometowns are in tier 3 or below cities, or in the countryside. These are the parts of the country where you have elderly people who are more susceptible to this virus and fatalities of this virus, and where you have the least concentration of medical infrastructure and supplies. Logistics is also the hardest. So you have a population that is more distilled across the country, that is moving in the largest numbers possible, and many people are going from big cities to the countryside, where there are not many resources and more people that are susceptible to catching and dying from this virus. So this is literally the worst time of the year this virus outbreak could have occurred. Okay, so that is the health situation. Now let's talk about the political response, because in my opinion, this is more of a political crisis than it is a health crisis. It is well known that many in the Chinese society, particularly in Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities, believe that the Chinese government underperformed in their response to the SARS outbreak, where they tried to cover up the outbreak and then they were slow in responding to the outbreak. It seems in this case, a similar sort of story has repeated itself. There was an initial attempt to sweep things under the rug. Then it came out that it was a major crisis and the government has been responding. Now, it seems that the latest central government response has been very strong, but that's because of the political pressure on the central government to perform this time. The government knew that if there was another SARS-like outbreak, they had to do a much better job responding to it than they did with SARS back in 2003. There's also been a couple of other changes since then. The nature of the Chinese economy and the nature of this particular outbreak means there's a greater threat to the economy than there was in 2003. That in of itself is a political issue. But more importantly, in 2003, the Chinese government model was represented more by a collective leadership model than the single man leadership model you now have under Xi Jinping. At that time, the Chinese government had been moving towards a collectivist leadership model, where you basically had top leaders, whether inside the Politburo Standing Committee and some elders that still wielded a level of influence. That was the group of people that were reigning over the country. Now, since then, we've seen the rise of Xi Jinping and supporters like Wang Qishan, and you've seen a collectivist or a collective leadership model move towards the model which we have now, where there's more and more power accumulated within the central government and within the hands of Xi Jinping himself. That means that you do not have spread accountability like you had before. There is more pressure on Xi Jinping to perform here. And now I'm not talking about the population rising up and overthrowing the government. I'm talking about legitimacy within the political apparatus itself. There are certainly cliques within the top leadership of the party, and those are always vying for influence and power. Xi Jinping had a very tough year last year. You saw things like Hong Kong, swine fever and the resulting pork and food inflation, and the Taiwanese elections. All were events that the party did not want to see happen, and examples where it seemed policies, particularly with Hong Kong and Taiwan, at best had failed, at worst had backfired. That, combined with the trade war with the US, meant there was a lot of pressure on Xi Jinping to perform well, because last year was a mixed bag of a year. Going into this year, having a major health crisis, similar to the SARS outbreak in 2003, means that there is a lot of pressure on the government to perform for the population and for Xi Jinping to perform for legitimacy within the party. Okay guys, now let's quickly talk about the economic impact, because this one is going to be serious. I think this is what you need to be following the most over the medium to long term. This is going to have the biggest effect on China, is the economic impact, and it's very serious. I'm going to put this up, then I'm going to go have a swim, then I'm going to go down the road and upload this for you guys. So the economic impact, this is going to be huge. I believe it's going to be much bigger than the effect that SARS had on the economy. The economy is more dynamic, it's more internationally integrated, and I believe this is going to go longer and have a more acute effect on the population, and thus have a larger economic impact than the SARS outbreak did. Now, early and what I believe to be conservative estimates is that economic growth, which was about 6 to 6.1% last year, is going to fall to 5.4% at best and 5% at worst. Now, like I said, these are early conservative estimates coming from China, as well as banks outside of China like Goldman Sachs. I believe those are conservative and those are going to get worse. So that's a major slowdown in economic growth. You may have seen that earlier this week on Monday, the Shanghai index was down 8%, or just under 8%. The Shenzhen index was down about 9%. These are the stock markets. So this is essentially a plunge in stock prices, resulting in about 380 billion US in losses. Now, if you're watching this from Europe or the United States, this is serious, but it's not as serious as a like event in, say, a developed Western economy with deep capital markets. The stock market drop does not affect the real economy as much as it would, say, in the United States, but it's still a big deal. Now, one of the things we need to keep an eye on during this is food inflation. This is a big one. If you're watching this episode, if you watch my show, you'll know that I reported in December that December year-on-year food inflation was 20%, which resulted in year-on-year inflation of 4.5%, which is relatively high. That food inflation was being fueled by the pork shortage that had resulted from African swine fever. Now, the fight against African swine fever and stabilizing pork prices is still ongoing. This is still happening in the background, but of course resources are being pulled from those efforts, economic and political, to fighting the coronavirus. So that pork supply issue is still a serious issue. But something else happened over the last 7 days. There has been a potential outbreak. There have been reports and a potential outbreak of bird flu in Hunan, which is the province south of the province that has Wuhan. And there have been large poultry farms that have had to put down tens of thousands of poultry, mainly chicken. Now, if this becomes an outbreak, this could also be very serious for inflation, particularly food inflation, because chicken is a substitute protein meat to pork. In fact, when the pork crisis was recognized as a key political task and a crisis by the Vice Premier of Agriculture last year, that was, who was that? Hu Chunhua. Yeah, Hu Chunhua. He identified chicken as a substitute meat and the number 2 source of protein in the country. He called for more pig farms as well as more chicken farms, and to use chicken as a replacement. If there is an outbreak of bird flu, that could seriously gut China's poultry supply, which would further exacerbate what is already very high food inflation at a time where, because of the coronavirus, logistic costs are much higher, and you're already seeing further food price increases. So you're having economic shock, slowdown, and food inflation all at once. These are all very serious. There's also a report from the Chinese CAS. There is Chinese Academy of Social Science. So I do the translation. There's also a report from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences that if that only. There is also, I really fucked that up, didn't I, guys? Let's do that one more time. There is a report from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences that only about 70% of private businesses in China can survive a 2 to 3 week extension of the Golden Week holidays, the Chinese New Year holidays that we've already had. Now, most of the country, most provinces and cities, accounting for about 80% of GDP last year in China, have extended their holidays at least 1 week. So that's a 2 week period of time, a 2 week vacation period you have now. I can say anecdotally that there are parts of the country where that has been pushed to the 17th of February. So people need to stay home until the 17th of February, which would represent a 3 week break. Basically, 80% of the country, 80% of the country in terms of GDP has been on holiday, unable to work for 2 weeks now, and that could go to 3 weeks. And this CAS report, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, suggests that only 70% of businesses can survive that, and the other businesses are likely to face bankruptcy. So the economic effect that this is going to have, you have a slowing economy. If you watch this show, you know that the Chinese are trying their hardest to mitigate the risk with a slowing economy as they transform their growth model. This is another shock to that economic slowdown that they don't need. These economic flow-on effects are going to be the big stories over the next few months as they begin to take control of the health situation. Once they get past that, these economic effects are going to be the true challenges that they have to deal with. One other thing before I go, that bird fever, that bird flu that I was talking about, that also has the capacity to mutate into human to human. If that happens, that is a true health crisis. That is a crisis that demands you shut borders. I believe at the moment many of Western governments' responses, including my own in New Zealand, to shut the borders is an overreaction. I believe we can manage the risk as it currently stands. But if the bird flu, if that reemerges and mutates to human with a fatality rate of 50% like we've seen in the past, combined with the corona situation, then that is a true global health emergency. Okay, guys, I'm going to leave it here. This is basically my thoughts, my professional thoughts, because I have sent this. I had to do a write-up for work. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll probably do another update later this week before I go back to China. So I'll see you later in the week here, and then I'll see you back in China. If you have any questions, or if you want clarification on any points, or if you disagree with anything that I've said here and you want to put in your 2 cents, please comment below. I would love to hear what your thoughts are. I'm going to leave it here. I'm going to go for a swim and a surf in beautiful, beautiful New Zealand. If you're in China, or if you know people that are affected by the current outbreak, be safe. I hope everything's going well for you. I'll see you in a couple of days. Cheers, guys.